Borders. The human-drawn lines that separate our countries, or if you want to get more technical, the geographic boundaries of political entities. In some places, borders are extreme, with obstacles guarded by armed forces and unpassable unless you have a specific permission or find some other way across. Others are natural barriers like rivers, mountains, or oceans, and in other cases they have been effectively abolished, like in Europe, where with the Schengen space, European people can roam freely throughout their continent, visiting their European friends without concern. In this video, I thought we would take a look at a few of the world's oldest borders, because I've always found it fascinating how some countries have managed to maintain their territorial limits unchanged throughout history, and that's a key detail for this video. I'm not listing the oldest established borders, I'm listing the oldest unchanged borders which last until today. I'm sure there were some borders in the years 500 BC, for instance, or so, but they no longer exist, so are not relevant for this video. Now let's jump right into it. If you want the quick answer, Andorra, Portugal, England, Scotland, and Monaco hold the titles for the top oldest borders. But if you want to know why and how and the other countries on the list, stick around through the video. But keep in mind, I can't be 100% sure about these or the rest. I'm basing them on the research I did. But answering the question of what are the world's oldest borders is difficult because 1, the notion of clearly defined borders is somewhat recent. 2, old maps aren't exactly accurate in some cases. And 3, some countries have been occupied and then returned to the original borders. Some have had minor details that are changes but not major ones. We also have to ignore some island nations, especially the small ones in the Pacific, because their borders are naturally defined, and so the merit of maintaining them isn't as much of the country as it is of the sea, I guess. But still, I think this list is as close as we can get, so what are the world's oldest borders? At number 10, the Chinese-Korean border in 1712. This one might be actually older than this, as a few documents point to the Chinese-Korean border being de facto established somewhere in the 15th century. We can read about this in the veritable records of the Joseon dynasty, a set of almost 2,000 volumes that cover the ruling period of the Korean Joseon dynasty. According to it, the Yalu and Tumen rivers were set as the borders in the era of the founder of the Joseon dynasty, so this was around the 15th century. However, its formalization took place in 1712, after a joint surveying expedition by the two states, the Qing dynasty of China and the Joseon dynasty of Korea, which formally demarcated their borders. And it seems that the decision of where the border should be placed has to do with the region of Jingdao in Chinese or Gando in Korean. This area of northeast China had been previously ruled by both Chinese and Korean states. Some Korean examples are the Bueo dynasty or the Goguryeo, which stretched from that area into Korea itself. The demarcation of these borders was an attempt to stop the continuous entry of Korean people into Gando, and it remains so until today. Next, we have the Spanish-French border in 1659. The formal layout of the Franco-Spanish border dates back to the signing of the Treaty of the Pyrenees between the kingdoms of Spain and France in 1659. This was a treaty signed to end the Franco-Spanish War of the 17th century. In the following 100 years or so, there were a few more treaties that were signed, changing some details to the border, but nothing major. These took place during the time of Napoleon III and implemented a rule of placing physical stone markers along the border. Here we can see one of them, and despite these small changes, the border has remained generally unchanged since the 1600s. An interesting fact that I honestly had no idea about is that Spain has an exclave in France, a small town named Livia, located in the eastern Pyrenees Mountains. There's also an island located on the border which the two countries share, Pheasant Island, where that first treaty took place in the 1600s to precisely define the border. Pheasant Island is located in the middle of a river on the border and is a condominium whose sovereignty is shared between France and Spain. One of them rules it for the first 6 months of the year and the other during the last semester. Then we have the Swiss-German border in 1648. This one, just like the Korean one, is actually older than this, and 1648 is just the official legal date. The Swiss borders with what is now Germany have been essentially the same since the end of the last war of the Old Swiss Confederacy, which was against the Holy Roman Empire. This was the Swabian War. At the end of the year of 1499, the Swiss border was defined, and this was consolidated and made official with the Peace of Westphalia in the year of 1648. At this conference, the Old Swiss Confederacy was formally recognized as independent from the Holy Roman Empire. Their borders were made official, and their role as Europe's most neutral country began. The border suffered minor changes, at most points even only temporary, especially during Napoleon's time, but have generally remained the same until today. At number 7, we have the oldest remaining border in the Asian continent, the Iran-Iraq-Turkey border. The boundary dates back to the 1639 Zuhab Treaty between Ottoman Turkey and Safavid Iran. The agreement stipulated that the boundary would run between the Zagros mountain and the Tigris River. A few changes took place, especially during the 20th century when Britain and Russia had colonial interests in the area, but nothing really significant. And today, despite the countries having changed, the border remains as the oldest one in Asia and one of the oldest in the world, now dividing Iran from Turkey and Iraq. Next is San Marino. San Marino is usually regarded as the world's oldest country and definitely the world's oldest republic, but their borders are not the oldest, despite being established in the year 301, which is a long time ago. The borders changed about halfway through its current existence, in the year of 1463, when the Pope awarded the towns of Fiorentino, Montegiardino, and Serraval to San Marino. A year later, the town of Faetano joined the Republic in 1464, defining its present-day borders. A fun fact about San Marino is that they have a special border guard. Although I guess a lot of countries have them, but San Marino's has a cool name and uniform. They are called Guards of the Rock. This next one is a weird one to believe, but bear with me through the explanation. At number 5, the Russian-Lithuanian border. Now, I know this border was established in 1990, but it is identical, or pretty much identical, to a border established in the year of 1422 with the Treaty of Melno between the Teutonic Knights Order and the Grand Duchy of Lithuania. Eventually, the territory of the Teutonic Order became part of Germany, and the Grand Duchy's territory is now divided between Poland and Lithuania. So one could argue that the political entities are no longer the same, especially in the case of the Teutonic Knights, then Germany, then Russia, but Lithuania is the state heir of the Grand Duchy, and it's interesting that the borderline is very similar, serving today as the dividing line between the Russian exclave of Kaliningrad and the modern Republic of Lithuania. At number 4, we have Monaco in 1297. Monaco is a principality and the world's second smallest country behind only the Vatican. It's located in southern France, near Italy, in the Mediterranean coast, and is fully surrounded by France in its land borders. And from my understanding, its limits have remained pretty much unchanged since its establishment, the only differences being which country surrounded it. In 1494, it was surrounded by the Republic of Genoa. Then during Napoleon's times, it was occupied by France, and after that, it was surrounded by the Kingdom of Sardinia, which eventually gave the surrounding land back to France. An interesting fact is that Monaco has actually changed its borders, not with France, but with the sea, through the techniques of land reclamation. Monaco's landmass has expanded by 20% in the last few years. Smaller countries like these European ones, which are almost effectively city-states, are more likely to have longer lasting borders because of how small they are and because of the reasoning behind their borders. If they define a specific city and the national identity is that city, it's unlikely to change. Liechtenstein's borders, for instance, have remained unchanged since 1434, when the Rhine established a border between the Holy Roman Empire and the Swiss cantons, a natural border. However, in the 19th century, they underwent a number of technical changes, simply because they verified the borders, and the modernization of measuring technologies and tools allowed for more accurate definitions. These are technically a change, but not a significant one. Opening up the top three, Portugal, also in 1297. The Portuguese-Spanish border is not only one of the oldest in the world, but the oldest uninterrupted in Europe. It is known as the Stripe and has lasted since 1297, the year when it was established through the Treaty of Alcanis. Although, for instance, the northern borders have been established since the country's birth in 1143 and the southern one in 1267. A curious aspect is that it is precisely in that final treaty in 1297 that the only inconsistency of the Portuguese continental borders lies. This treaty established Portugal's borders and specifically annexed the border town of Olivença. The town of Olivença was under Portuguese sovereignty between this year and 1801, when it was invaded by the Spanish, and eventually in 1815, the Treaty of Vienna claimed that the territory should be returned to the Portuguese, but it never was. Now, did I conveniently ignore this exception because I wanted to include my own country in the top three? Maybe, but come on, it's a tiny detail and makes no difference whatsoever in the general perception of the border. Plus, the change is still disputed. Portugal does not recognize the Spanish sovereignty over the territory. At number 2, one that I found incredibly interesting, the Scottish-English border in 1237. During the medieval period, the government's control frequently diminished the further people got from the capital, and so the final distance between the capital and its surroundings and the border line was known as borderlands. These places were usually lawless and attracted outlaws. I'm telling you this because in 1333, during the Second War of Scottish Independence, Scotland was defeated. An English king, Edward III, occupied much of the borderlands, and these borderlands between England and Scotland were always key in defining their border. In the 13th century, the English created the region of the Scottish Marshes, an area where clans switched which country they supported as suited their interest at that time, and at some points it was even a specific clan who ruled it, without control of either Scotland or England. Eventually, in the 1600s, now with Scotland and England under a royal union, the king renamed the region from marshes to middle shires, and with heavy crown regulation managed to bring order and law to it. My point with all this story is that despite all these issues, with claims on one side and the other, the only changes that have taken place since the initial Treaty of 1237 were very small and inside the tiny region of the marshes. And so I think we can say that the Scottish-English border is in fact one of the world's oldest unchanged borders, lasting since 1237 until today. And finally, the world's oldest border is Andorra's in 1278. The reason why I put this one at number 1 and not the Scottish-English one is that Andorra has suffered literally no changes to my knowledge, and so I feel like it deserves number 1. The borders of the principality have been unchanged since that year, when a land dispute between the county of Foix and the diocese of Urgell ended with a feudal charter, which established their joint sovereignty over the mountain territory of Andorra, and so the borders were established. The county of Foix has been extinct since 1607, but the charter still holds. High in the Pyrenees that separate France from Spain, Andorra continues its existence as an independent condominium. They have 2 co-princes, the Bishop of Urgell and the legal successor of the Counts of Foix, which is the President of France. Today, it borders Spain and France. In this amazing map that I found, made by Reddit user PiceGoody82, we get summarized information about border ages and a few cool additional details, like examples of countries whose borders have also changed very little, with small details being changed, but the overall delimitation of the state being pretty close to what it originally was, like Ethiopia, for instance. Others also have very old borders, but have seen them changed a number of times, but having their current version very close or even identical to the original form, just like we saw with the Kaliningrad case or the Ottoman Safavid line. Other examples are part of the Dutch-German border or part of the Czech-German border. There's also stretches or portions of borders that are old while the full border isn't as old. An example of that is the Canadian-US border in the East Coast, with one stretch being established as early as 1763, but the next one being in 1783 and the other in 1842, or this part of the Eastern Russian-Chinese border established in 1689, with the remaining of the border having been defined in 1858, 60, and 88. You can also see the average age of borders per continent. Europe is the oldest with 1777, with North America coming next at 1861, South America at 81, Asia at 96, and Africa at 1906, with the Middle East being an exception, within Asia having 1934 as the average border establishment year. Another cool detail is that despite these somewhat old border averages, 33% of the world's borders, so 1/3, is younger than 100 years, with the two youngest being this one from 2000 in Arabia and the disputed border of North and South Sudan in 2009. And those are, from my understanding and research, the oldest continuous borders in the world. Essentially the borders that have remained unchanged in general for the longest period of time. Like I said, this is a hard call to make because we have a lot of cases and a lot of exceptions, but I think these 10 plus a few more summarize the list well and give us a good idea of what the world's oldest borders truly are. Thanks so much for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, make sure to subscribe to catch future ones and leave a comment below with your opinions or thoughts or suggestions for future videos. Once again, thanks for watching, and I will see you next time for more general knowledge.